Right. So that's a good way of framing what you do, that you essentially are an exec team that parachutes in and sorts it out.
Yeah,
okay.
Correct.
How did you go from being a pilot to doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Adrien Nisbet, CEO of the Endgame, business transformation optimization specialist. So let's start off with the Endgame as the name of your business, how that came about, what your core expertise is, and how that all eventuated.
Yeah, sure. So the Endgame, I mean, the name the Endgame came from the philosophy, I guess, of how we run turnarounds in particular. And it's really focusing on that, what the end game is for the business and what that looks like in whether it be 6 months or 5 years, depending on how serious the situation is. It's being able to establish that and then work backwards from that, and be able to engage the different people that might be required to take the business on that journey. So our team is made up of people like PR and communications type people, or software developers, or through right the way to anybody in sales and marketing and systems help and stuff. So we're very operationally focused on achieving that end game for the business and being able to take it on that journey, and bring the right people, I guess, at the right time to deliver on that.
Right. And typically you get involved in that journey when perhaps things aren't going as well as they could be.
Yeah, there's two main areas where we get involved. Certainly, turnarounds is big for us. So it's when things are going really badly, and that we need to get in straight away and work with the company. Or in an owner exit scenario, which is also when there might be a very operational owner or CEO, and they want to transition from operations into more strategic focus.
Okay.
And it's actually quite surprising just how similar turnaround and sort of owner exit is.
Right. So when we talk about owner exit there, it's not necessarily they want to sell the business and move on. It's more that they want to move on to a less operational role within the business and just think bigger picture.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So we term it owner exit, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're selling the business. No. Oftentimes we'll work with an owner to get into more strategic work, and they have a new lease on life.
Okay.
They love it. And we've been able to get the team to step up and take more of that operational leadership.
Okay. And so really coming back to the end game can mean a hell of a lot of different things to different people. It's about setting goals and making those super clear and having metrics to define whether or not you're hitting that goal and setting a plan.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
And the end game really is, why don't we go back to the story of really where it came about. The thinking of where it came about was in some pretty difficult turnarounds, and one of them we quite literally came up with the plan on the back of a beer coaster. So we were sitting around sort of trying to determine where we were going to take this business and how we were going to get it. And there can be a lot of confusion in that, and there can be a lot of complexity in that. But when you really simplify it down to what we're trying to achieve over a period of time, the more we can get a simple end game sort of defined for the business, the better then all the decisions from there can be made.
Okay. So what are some of the simplest end game definitions you've come across? Is it just simply, I want to achieve profitability? Is I want to achieve a certain number of EBIT, or how much does it have to be even defined as a number? Can it be more that, I want to reach a certain number of units sold or something? Like what things have you seen actually translate well?
Yeah, we always go for an end game that has a financial outcome and typically try and get a profitability outcome that we're going for. So whatever that might be in a period of time. But then it's about linking to that simple kind of financial outcome. It's linking, what is the vision for the organisation going to look like? Why are we here? What are we doing this for? What team members are we going to need? What resources are we going to need to get that? And so oftentimes the visibility piece that we'll put in, systems and things we'll put in, the visibility really focuses on different things than the financial, but it's all linked to getting that ultimate financial outcome.
Okay. Well, that probably ties in nicely to my next question, which is really going to be what sort of things get businesses in trouble. Like you said to me previously that in another conversation that it's better to, know what to look out for rather than deal with the consequences of having not looked out for those things. So I was just thinking there as you were speaking that clearly visible metrics or business reporting is probably one of the things a lot of people don't do well, so they don't actually know what's happening under the hood. A, is that the case? And B, what else should businesses be really ensuring that are just covered, 100% covered in order to not get into trouble?
Yeah, sure. And I think that, there's a few big ones. There's there's a couple of things there where you're talking, I guess, more about complexities and things that we might get ourselves into, and therefore we don't understand, the simple targets that we're trying to achieve and how we're even monitoring that or looking at it. And oftentimes in that space, I would say one of the biggest things we find is that we've let the systems get so complex that we don't really know what's going on. We can't see the simple, overview stuff. So it's that sort of complexity that oftentimes does get people into trouble. But one of the things we nearly always see is too much focus on revenue and not enough focus on profitability. I talk about the revenue delusion sometimes. It's this concept that we think we're going to reach ultimate success by growing the top line, and we neglect to consider how that converts to profit. Now, in my view, if you've got a plan to get to that, if you've got a plan to get to profitability, and you're accepting a lower margin or a lower profit in a short period of time over a period of known time, then that's one thing. But oftentimes we deal with businesses that really have no concept of how this increase in revenue is going to ultimately give earnings, lead to earnings.
A mentor of mine always says that cash is vanity, profit's sanity, cash is king. I think, did I say revenue first? I hope I said revenue first. Yeah. Anyway, revenue, vanity, profit, sanity, cash king. There you go. Got it right that time.
Absolutely right. And, I love that one as well. And it's totally right. There's so many businesses that don't focus on that. And there's so many businesses that don't really sort of take the time to just understand the simple financial model. Don't have to be an accountant for that, but trying to understand that simple financial model is important. And oftentimes the businesses that we get involved in have never really done that piece of work. They've never done the piece of work to understand how this is going to convert to profitability. Yeah,
because that's coming back to the fact that it's a period of very high inflation at the moment. If you're taking an assumed profitability underlying that revenue number, but it's being eroded and you're not aware of that erosion over time as those cogs go through the roof, you could get in some real trouble.
You can. And, the mentality that we've seen in a number of businesses is there's often this mentality that we have to be the cheapest, that we have to get our price down in order to be competitive. And, in the end, that's a no-win game. Trying to constantly play that. And
preaching to the choir here, by the way, telco is terrible for it.
Yeah.
I mean, the likes of TPG, etc. And But anyway, sorry, Karen.
Yeah, no. Well, that was it. It's often the case that we're driving ourselves into a position of feeling like the only way we can win work is to be the cheapest price. And that's one of the things that is very common when we get involved in businesses. And, it's common throughout all industries. A lot of business owners will tell me when we start working with them that our industry is different. This is industry specific, and the reality is it's not. That mentality is across every industry. So.
Yeah, and there's a real skill that comes to pricing strategies, right? Like, did you catch Ron Wood from Pricing Insights webinar with the CEO Institute? He had it was all about the pricing, and we worked with him. We engaged him probably a couple of years ago now, and he opened my eyes to the concept of value-based pricing, right? Just, understanding how your value premium aligns against the market as a whole, and perhaps within specific segments, and how that's perceived by different people in different roles within different organizations. And then making sure that all of your positioning relates back to that value premium and that your pricing aligns with it. And it just blew our minds and has fundamentally changed the business. So very good point. There was some other points that you made in another presentation that came across, and you talked about the balance sheet can be misleading as well due to the intangible assets held on it. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's one of the things that we see quite often, even with boards that we go in and sort of have some conversations about the trouble. And we've had boards that have sort of said, we've got cash flow issues and we're concerned about solvency. And at the same time saying we've got quite a good net tangible asset position. And it's one of those things that, I think when you're in the crisis, when you're in this zone, it's a human thing to want to find the best possible solution, to want to find the light that's going to say, yes, things are going to be okay, and miss the simple. And, the reality is it's not much good looking at a balance sheet and saying we've got net tangible assets of many millions of dollars when net assets of many millions of dollars when you find out that a couple of million of that is intangible.
Yeah.
Either goodwill or whatever it might be.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. How many times do you see goodwill essentially on the balance sheet because people, again, are just trying to be glass half full about it and see value in something the market probably doesn't agree with?
Yeah, you see that a lot.
Okay.
And I talk to, and our team, goes in and deals quickly to identify, what of these assets are actually able to be converted to cash, essentially, and what of these assets are intangible and are really, by the time the business is in that much trouble, the goodwill's not worth anything anyway.
That's a great point. Yeah, the actual, whether it was ever tangible, it's certainly less tangible as you go down the toilet.
Yeah.
How much of an understanding do you think business leaders have, or even execs inside the business who really have responsibility for ensuring that there is free cash flow? Do you think that's a well understood concept within the business community?
Look, I think it varies, like everything, but I think certainly in the medium size space, there is a broad misunderstanding of not just cash flow, but certainly the what gets a business to make money. And oftentimes what we find there is you've got really smart people that are great at their technical skill, whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. They've been successful at growing sales and they've been successful at growing revenue quite well, but they've not got that ability to understand cash flow. They've not got that ability to understand the profitability as much, and so therefore you do get in this situation where trouble can begin from exactly that, from misunderstanding. And these are smart people, that when empowered with we often talk about that in the turnaround, when empowered with that information, when we're able to display that information, some of the business owners we deal with do amazing things.
It really paints or presents the case for a purposeful course of financial literacy, training for your senior management team. I don't think I've certainly not come across a real sustained focus on that in the businesses I work with, but it's clearly, I doubt that you come across many troubled businesses where the leadership team are super financially literate and, know what they're doing.
Yeah, correct. 100%. And I think you're spot on. We do that with teams we work with is we do basic financial literacy stuff. And we work oftentimes with their accounting firms to sort of help empower the whole business with a greater understanding of how it's performing financially.
Okay. You were talking before about the pricing or the revenue delusion or the misunderstanding around revenue. You had mentioned as well the volume delusion. Is it essentially people just you come across businesses that are in trouble because they figure they ship more units that equals better results?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Revenue delusion, volume delusion are kind of, I guess I think about them in broadly the same. It is this concept that we're going to be doing better in the future because we're going to do more.
Right.
And the reality is that that's not the case. If it can be, it can. I'm not suggesting there isn't a loss leading strategy that works.
Sure.
But oftentimes when it's not a properly devised and understood strategy, it doesn't work. Just going after growth or just going after volume very rarely just happens to lead to profit.
You also said that profit on that front can be seen as a dirty word. Can you explain that to me? Where have you seen that and how's it presented?
Yeah, I talk about profit being a dirty word in a lot of organisations we get into. It's the concept that we'll go in there and we'll start talking about profit, and it's almost like we don't want to talk about that. That's not
in front of the staff, or just in general.
In general, don't want to talk about profitability, and I think it comes from that. I think what you're saying, it does come from that they don't necessarily want to share the profitability of the company with the staff. They don't necessarily want that visibility with everybody. But what it becomes is this even at a leadership team level at times where we won't talk about profit. And we'll talk about everything else, but we won't talk about how does this initiative, how does this strategy, how does whatever it is that we're trying to achieve, how does that ultimately get to profitability? And changing that mentality and understanding, I guess, what is a profitable decision and what is not a profitable decision is a big part of what we do to empower people to do better. You spoke before about, asking me about what gets businesses into trouble, and oftentimes it's creeping normality, right? It's just we're accepting a new normal, and as performance continues to degrade, we accept a new normal, and then eventually we find ourselves losing lots of money. And the way you reverse that is getting everyone in the business to make more profitable decisions.
Right. And what sort of dashboards or visibility do you need to give to the team to make sure they're aligned on that week on week, month on month, quarter on quarter?
So we link it again back to the end game, if you like. So we'll try and come up with a number of simple things that actually then link to profitability. So in every business, the best I've ever seen gets down to 3 or 4 things, and everyone knows it. Now, it doesn't say profit on it, but it might say utilization, or it might say number of whatever it may be, and being able to display that to everybody in the organisation, and understand that links to the profitability of the business, is a key thing that we find makes a big difference to the organisation.
Indecision was the other one I wanted to cover off on. In what ways does that present as an issue or a causation?
Yeah, so indecision is, I think, the closer you get to the corporate world, the more this becomes an issue. It's very, very easy to sort of say, let's put that to next board meeting, or let's do a report on it, or let's
basically kick the can down the road kind of thing.
Let's just kick it. Right?
Yeah.
It's too hard. I don't want to think about it. And it's not really causing me that much problem right now. Link that back again to creeping normality. It's not that bad, right? It's a bit worse than it was last month. It's not really that bad. Let's just get on with life, and we'll talk about it next board meeting. We'll talk about it next strategy day. We'll talk about it at whatever we like to kick the can down the road for. And that becomes a semi-cultural thing in the organisation, that you just see that we don't really want to make decisions anymore. We don't want to make decisions, and even more, we don't want to make decisions on limited information. It's like every time we want to make a decision, we want to have everything.
Right.
And from what we've found is, business is not that, it's not that black and white.
No.
You've got to be able to make, particularly if we've seen in the last few years, got to be able to make decisions with limited information in uncertain times, and that I think has become a bigger factor over the last few years.
How much, how much is that sort of reliance on data? Like, we have a lot of data that we typically have access to now. Is there a sense that people just feel like they can't make decisions without essentially having every element of the potential data presented to them before making that call? And I guess as a second question, is it that businesses need to set almost like a red line, like anything below this, even if now we're up here, anything below this in future would be alarm bells, holy crap, the world's breaking down? Or is it, again, not that black and white? Is it more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I support that concept, and we do talk about that quite a lot of we set yourself an expectation of results, and if the expectation of results is X and then we're achieving X minus whatever, then we need to act and make that decision before you get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hugely important factor in making sure that we hold ourselves accountable to results and making decisions, is look ahead, decide, I expect to get a result of whatever it is, and then measure it. And if it's not there, then have already made the decision. Because if you haven't, it's very, very easy to get there and come up with all sorts of reasons as to why we'll wait till next month, or the sales team didn't quite get to it that month, but we think they'll meet the target next month or whatever, and we haven't really clearly identified what we're going to do about it if it doesn't. Probably a better question than my first one before is, when you see that indecision, is it sometimes driven, do you think, through a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities? Because I know going back a long time now in Lightwire, we found that there was at the leadership level, we had some roles where several people felt they had ownership of a function within the business, and others where no one felt they had clear ownership of that. And there was just this inertia that crept in because everyone was like decision by committee in some cases. No one felt empowered to make a decision. Do you see that lack of just organizational clarity a problem? Sure, and I think the where we see that is a bigger problem is when you've got leaders that are kind of borderline micromanaging, that you can see that if it's not acceptable to make a decision, and it's not acceptable to make the wrong decision, then oftentimes that leads to indecision, and that can be a cultural thing, and it can be particularly evident in sort of more micromanagement style organisations. It is incredible to see the difference when you do get the change in decision-making in an organisation, and people are empowered to make those decisions, and they feel safe to make those decisions without fear that the wrong decision will have some horrible consequence.
Horrific. Yeah.
It is. We've seen turnarounds in the bottom line of $50,000 a week by getting everyone in the team to understand what it is that they're trying to do and be able to measure their success, but also be empowered to try to go out there and give it a go. And make decisions and get on with it.
I guess there's that sort of trust but verify kind of thing where as long as you can see the reporting and there's some sort of SLA trigger, I suppose, where if something isn't happening as expected, that is alerted in some automated sort of a way. So you can go, right, well, I left these decisions to be made. I expected these outcomes. Those outcomes haven't happened. Now I need to come back in and see what the hell's going on. I figure that's the offset to the autonomy, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're right.
Look at me go. So let's say for some reason those things haven't been done right. Business starts getting in a world of trouble. How late is too late to turn it around? Is it simply if it's literally been liquidated, or is there always hope before that point, or how does it work?
Yeah, look, my view is that there is always options.
Okay.
We're oftentimes getting involved in situations that are 5 minutes from the administrators or the liquidators.
Right.
And we certainly feel that there's always options. I mean, say that, but then there's obviously the exceptions.
Yeah.
But we are we've turned around businesses that have been losing many millions of dollars, have no cash, and certainly really facing insolvency quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to turn that in a short period of time and be able to get the trajectory. Because again, putting back to the point before, a lot of this is a creeping normality effect to get you into this situation, and reversing it is a mentality shift, and you need the visibility to understand what is going to make you profitable from now.
Yep.
No matter how you've got here is one thing, but how do we be profitable from now? How do we improve that profitability? And once you get the whole organisation making those decisions together, you can actually you can turn the business quite quickly. You'll still have cash flow issues,
sure,
and you'll still have I sometimes talk about the wolves at the door. You'll have all sorts of creditors and everybody at the door, but you can usually hold those wolves back if you're able to get the profitability rising.
And a clear plan, I imagine.
Correct,
as well, right?
And a clear plan.
Some good forecasting. How often do you find the business owners in that situation, they actually kind of maybe have an idea of what they need to do, but it's a really hard decision and horrible, in their view, things have to be done? Does that often happen, e.g. maybe layoffs, or maybe restructures, or maybe just halting a line of services that someone they really like requires, or things like that? Does that come into it?
Yeah, I mean the mindset of the owners and the leadership team, often by the time they get into trouble is definitely interesting. By the time you're in that sort of space, you're not really capable to make good decisions. So you're making decisions based on fear, really.
Yep.
You're making decisions based on the fear of personal circumstances, particularly directors' liabilities and various other things. So, the decisions that the owners are making at that time is often problematic. And yes, they want to hold on to something that has happened in the past, or they want to hold on to, we used to do it this way, it used to work that way, or when we were smaller, or when we were bigger, or whatever it might be. But in reality, it's got that place by whatever means, and the only way we're going to change that is to change it. Doing the same thing, expecting a different result. We all know that definition.
We do. So, okay, well, let's talk about things that do work then, right? So, and you've said there you've got to accept the current reality, which is fine. Don't blame the market. I guess that's taking responsibility and ownership, right? It's not the market's fault the situation's happened. It's your inability to respond to market forces. That must be a bloody difficult conversation to have with someone. It's like, hi, you don't know me particularly well. You're going to be around for a little while. Everything you've done's wrong. You have no one to blame. How does that go?
Yeah, look, it can be interesting, and much of our task is about really taking people on the journey, the owners, the staff, anyone that might be involved. It's a real kind of people skills, related sort of thing that we've got to do. So you've got to be able to be very good at taking people on that journey. Accepting the current reality is something that is difficult for people to do, and it's actually that first step to being able to get out of this is if you accept the current reality and you don't blame the market, then you can start to accept that we have to change, and you can start to get on that positive trajectory. But it is difficult because most people will blame the market, right? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
if you're in that situation, I would.
Yeah,
I'd blame the market.
Yeah, I hate taking responsibility for things I do wrong.
Exactly right. And the reality is that I've never actually seen a situation where it is the market. I'm sure there's some out there. I've never seen it.
Yeah.
The good thing is once you can highlight to owners and executives that they are actually very highly skilled and great leaders, which oftentimes they are. That's how they got there, and that it's not that. Not the market did it. They did it, but it's because they weren't empowered with the right information. Now, once they can be empowered with that, once they understand how to drive the business profitably, how to drive a positive culture, then they can start to sort of see that, right, I need to accept my responsibility, but with my new knowledge and empowerment, then I can take this to another level.
The other one I'm going to dive into a little bit is the other action to take when you find yourself in trouble is to negotiate the balance sheet. So how does that take shape?
So that we was talking about before in terms of the wolves at the door. Oftentimes you mentioned it before, the cash is king sort of mantra, and that's 100% accurate. But in those times of trouble, when you really need to make transformational change, it actually becomes profitability that's the biggest factor. You need to focus on profitability first because the balance sheet is typically negotiable. So when I talk an example like that, if you've got a creditor, oftentimes the ATO ends up being the biggest creditor, but if you've got a creditor that is there, that is seeing the profitability of the business continue to degrade or lose money, they're going to be pretty quick to want to get out of that situation.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. If you're able to show a path to profitability, then typically cash flow management becomes a lot easier because you're able to negotiate with the ATO, creditors, debt holders, or whoever it is. But none of these people will want to negotiate with you if you're not able to show a path to profit.
Right. How much do you see we've got to assume, I think, that the US is already in recession, right? So we probably will at some point get into a bit of strife ourselves in this part of the world. How much busier do you expect to get, basically, in this particular space?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing demand increasing for us. I think there is already what's been termed in the media as zombie businesses kicking around there as a hangover from COVID, if you like. What
was the term that there was that grace period essentially where even if you were trading insolvent, you didn't have to wrap up. What was it called? There was
the. I'm not sure what they were calling that, but you've described it very well.
Yeah, look at me go.
You've done well. But perhaps there was an amnesty in there or something.
Yeah, that sounds right. Let's just say amnesty.
Use that. That sounds like a good word to use. The basically what's happened in practice is that the ATO and others have not been particularly forceful in collecting debts, and they've also obviously had this cash flow in. As cash flow boost and as JobKeeper and all the like. So balance sheet health throughout the pandemic was actually quite strong. And certainly some of the businesses we've seen, the cash has been sitting on the balance sheet, but slowly being eroded by loss of profits.
Yep.
Now, eventually that has to come to conclusion. And it seems from what we understand too, the ATO is certainly wanting their money back more than they were.
Yeah.
So that is definitely putting pressure on the sector already, and we're certainly seeing more demand in the space at the moment.
Just going way back to our pricing discussion, just thinking about how critical that is when you've got rate of inflation at 6% roughly, only going up, probably 7% by now. That's going to be a really interesting space to see how every sector deals with that, and particularly the people who were positioning themselves as price leaders, right? But interesting times. Maybe something more positive we can talk about is the exit assistance you give. So again, an owner's exit, not necessarily being that they want to sell, but potentially, but also perhaps they just want to enable a team below them to really take over the operational duties. So what sort of strategies and frameworks do you use to enable that?
Yeah, so as I said before, I think owner exits and turnarounds are actually surprisingly similar. And a lot of the time when you find the owner has held a business for a very long time, the systems can often be the owner. The owner is the system. And we talk about they're managed by walking around, right? So So oftentimes the same thing has to be applied to the owner exit. We have to get a good system that's going to give the visibility to the team members. We have to be able to get them to understand what success looks like, what the end game looks like, and how they're being measured to that end game. And then again, we need to get the team to step up and be able to lead the operations without the owner involved day to day. So it's a very similar approach to what we take in turnarounds.
Okay.
And getting that layer, and we have our own. Obviously, we're an executive team really, and we can go in and form part of that executive team for a period while we get that to step up and allow that owner to come out.
Right. So that's a good way of framing what you do, that you essentially are an exec team that parachutes in and sorts it out.
Yeah,
okay.
Correct.
Come back to me with come back to me. We should go back to, how did you go from being a pilot to doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank
you.
Yeah, so I had an aviation background, and I've obviously flown for most of my life as well. I still fly now and use that advantage to get around and see more regional businesses. But I've had a history in actually automation originally. With my father's business was an automation and control business. So my brother and I got involved in that back 25 years ago or something. And then
doing the quick maths in my head, late 90s.
Yeah, that'd be about right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So so we, the business side of things, I really got involved in through that and through working with my family business and with my brother. And then in time, I left that and went on to doing the turnarounds, because we'd done some work with some private equity companies in Sydney, and that had led that way. The aviation background has always been something that's driven some of my approach to business and some of the decision making and some of the things that you learn from aviation, like creeping normality as an example, or like confirmation bias and things like this that has actually helped to sort of lead how we manage particularly crisis. And there's a lot of similarities between managing that in an aviation environment and in a business environment.
How much, that book there, is it the Checklist Manifesto? And it's that whole sort of, there's a lot in there about the pilots who just have this huge checklist every time they're about to go anywhere, and every time something goes wrong, there's a new thing on the checklist that they check for. And it all came from some crazy plane, I think just after World War II, that was the most advanced plane that had been built to that time. And basically there was just too many things to do, and there was no structure behind the way the pilots flew it, and it blew up and crashed.
Yeah.
But does that mentality, just that structured approach to each flight, translate to business in the way that book kind of put it forward?
I think there is in business there's a similar thing. There is a structured approach to parts of the business, and where you can really find yourself into trouble is if you do try to be too structured in everything. And it is kind of a similar thing across into aviation. We need structure, but we also need to be able to deal with unknowns. We need to be able to make decisions with different things going in front of us that perhaps we haven't read in the book. So the same thing applies in business, and the same traps can be got into if we want to try to process things too far.
Yeah.
You would have seen the same things in business before. There's only so much procedure and process can do.
Yeah.
And then eventually, rely on people to make good decisions.
Yeah, that's why all good business, I think, starts with good people, right?
Correct, 100%.
Just another thought that came into my head there is, we were talking about private equity before. Is there a sort of like an ecosystem or a niche business where private equity kind of circles these troubled businesses, trying to pick up a bargain, where they see these stressed assets and go, we could pick this up for a bargain, off we go? Is that something you encounter at all?
We do see that from time to time, and we do work with some organisations to actually manage that operational side of that for them in that. And typically there are a number of particularly in the US, there's businesses that definitely do this as an absolute strategy. Yeah, that's right. They're everywhere. Not so much in Australia, but there are some that definitely go out, more industry specific generally. They don't typically go out and do it across just any sort of business, but we've certainly seen some that take that approach industry specific.
Okay. Is there any advice you'd like to finish up with for Australian businesses, whether it's regional or otherwise, as they basically enter into what's going to be a pretty tough, I think, 12 to 24 months, or at least for certain sectors? Anything in particular you would think that in a period of high inflation they should be looking out for or paying attention to?
Yeah, I would certainly say price first, second, and third.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to be an environment where we're getting the pricing right is going to be critical. And I think businesses to move too late in that will struggle. We can already see some of these effects coming through. We can see where it's going to be. And the smart businesses now are raising prices ahead of time and getting ahead of that curve. And I think the ones that don't will be left wondering how they went from being quite profitable to suddenly losing money. The margin of error there, as we all know, it's easy to sit above and look at a business and say, oh, the margin of error is very small. But when you're in the business, it's a harder thing to recognise. But if you're making lower margins of 5% and your price is not right by 5%, well, guess what you've just done?
Yeah. And I think we even saw when COVID kicked in, right? The airlines running at razor thin margins were in more trouble than the others. And same with the hospitality sector. The thin margins were really exposed. And I guess we're going to see that again. I've seen two things so far that have been interesting for me. One, that Telstra put its prices up on some mobile plans at the start of this month, I think, or are putting them up at the end of this month. Now, only $3 or $4 some plans, but it's just a sign that if telcos are starting to put prices up, then it's bad. And the other one is that I've seen other people in our industry, businesses in our industry, who have actually sought desperately to decrease COGS by actually doing things like bring your own router rather than you get a router with the service. And they'll give a decreased price for that, but not as much of a decrease as it saves them on the actual hardware itself. So it's very clear that there's a reluctance still in certain sectors to put the price up even during this weird period of inflation.
Yeah, certainly for sure. And that's probably another thing that you could say is very important for businesses to look out for is the monitoring and careful consideration of gross margin through this period. I see this a lot where businesses will often focus on their net margins, but whether your pricing's right is obviously going to be shown more in your gross margin analysis than necessarily in your net margin. And it's an important thing that both of those numbers are very important. If you're out there running a business and you don't focus on the gross margin and know what it is, it's an important thing to analyse, particularly when it comes to pricing. Okay.
Well, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, either to talk about how to get rich with a great exit or get more time on the golf course with a sort of operational exit, or they're finding things tough and they want to talk about how they can turn it around, what's the best way to find you?
Sure. You can find me on the Endgame website, which is theendgame.com.au, and you can certainly reach out by phone. You can reach out directly to me at my mobile number there on the website.
Great. And also, I'm pretty sure you're on LinkedIn because I think that's where we caught up.
I am on LinkedIn, Good. So you can definitely find me on LinkedIn as well.
All right, Adrien Nisbet. That's Nisbet.
That's correct.
So look at me go. All right, mate. Thanks very much for coming in. Good chat.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.